Brexit Party MEP, Matt Zarb-Cousin from Clean Up Gambling, former spokesperson for Jeremy Corbyn, and Harry Phibbs, local government editor and columnist at ConservativeHome. They're all with me. 0345 6060 973, text 84850, and watch us on Global Player.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 8 o'clock. The European Court of Human Rights has rejected an appeal by Archie Battersby's family to intervene in his case. The 12-year-old's parents are trying to delay a decision to withdraw his life support. He's been in a coma since April. His mother, Holly Dance, says he will now be moved to a hospice.
That's the most heartbreaking thing about it. You know, I wish I could take you all in there to see. It's just unfair. The fact as a parent, we've got no rights with our children. It's disgusting.
G7 foreign ministers have condemned China's response to Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan. The US House Speaker is the most senior official to visit the self-governed island in 25 years. Beijing, which claims the territory as its own, says America is playing with fire. Former Tory leadership candidate Sajid Javid has backed Liz Truss to be the next Prime Minister. The former Chancellor also criticised his successor Rishi Sunak's approach, insisting tax cuts are now essential. A YouGov poll of Tory members puts the Foreign Secretary 34 points ahead. And London's fire brigade has praised M&S for their decision to stop selling disposable barbecues across the whole of the UK. It follows a series of grass fires in the recent hot and dry weather. In the city, the FTSE 100 has closed up 36 points at 74.45. The pound buys $1.21 and €1.19. LBC weather, showers for Northern Ireland and Scotland tonight, staying mostly dry for England and Wales with a low of 8. Patchy cloud and sunny spells tomorrow, some scattered showers in the north and west, and a high of 24 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Lottie Morley.
This is LBC. From Global. Leading Britain's conversation. Cross Question with Iain Dale.
Hello, a very good evening and welcome to Cross Question. I'm Iain Dale. Today with me on the panel we have Mary Bousted, Joint General Secretary of the National Education Union. Ben Habib on my left is a businessman, columnist and former Brexit Party MEP. Matt Zarb-Cousin is a campaigner, director of Clean Up Gambling and former spokesperson for Jeremy Corbyn. And Harry Phibbs is local government editor and a columnist at ConservativeHome. They're here to answer your calls. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call. You can text 84850 and of course you can watch us on Global Player.
Call 0345 6060 973. Tweet at LBC. Text 84850. Cross Question with Iain Dale. This is LBC.
Well, welcome to you all. Let's crack on with our first question. It's from Noel in Gloucester. Noel, hi. What would you like to ask?
Should Keir Starmer support the unions and the strikers? And if he doesn't, what effect do you think that will have on his leadership?
Mary Bousted.
Well, I think that's up to Keir Starmer to make that policy, to make that decision. I mean, I think, to be clear, it is not Keir Starmer and the Labour Party who we have the argument with. We've got the argument with a Conservative government which since 2010 has seen in real terms the pay of my members cut by over a quarter. And that's why we are seeing strikes in the public sector. I note today that the junior doctors are saying that they're going to ballot for strike action. We'll be balloting our members, National Education Union members, in the autumn term. We've got criminal barristers walking out 1 week in, 1 week out. And the reason is that, public servants cannot afford to do those jobs anymore. We're seeing an exodus from public service. I just looked before we came, over 900,000 vacancies in the NHS, 40% of teachers leaving within 10 years, a quarter leaving within 2 years. And that's a combination of toxic workloads and, inadequate rates of pay. So the argument we have is with a Conservative government, not with the Labour Party. Now, I do think that there should have been a clear direction. Where I think that Keir Starmer had made a big mistake is by saying to his MPs, "You're not allowed to join picket lines." I think, frankly, that's unenforceable, and the fact is that
it was actually only shadow ministers. It wasn't
shadow
all
ministers,
of his MPs.
yeah. All right. Well.
Although
Lisa and Andy went.
Lisa
and Andy went and spoke. So, and then it becomes quite silly. Then it comes, are you on a picket line, or are you speaking to people on a picket line, or are you speaking to them on a Zoom call? I think then it becomes really a bit silly. But I don't want that to be a distraction from who we have the argument with.
Table. Shouldn't you be able to expect a little bit more from the leader of the Labour Party? The Labour Party came from the trade unions, and yet Keir Starmer almost seems to be wanting to divorce himself or the party from the trade union movement.
I think he needs a much better narrative on the reason why public sector workers, dedicated public sector workers, are in so many professions are so angry that they are prepared to take action which they don't want to take. Nobody wants to go on strike action. But the fact is, I've never seen such an outpouring of anger amongst the membership.
Does your union finance the Labour Party in any way?
No, we're not affiliated to the Labour Party.
Because there will be some, Unite are already muttering about withdrawing funding, and if that happened, that would be a very serious thing. Harry Phibbs.
Oh, I think that, I'm sympathetic to the unions in the sense that there's this inflation is not a surprise. It's caused by quantitative easing, by the increase in the money supply. That's, there
were lots of causes of inflation.
Well, I would say the fundamental cause was that if you create artificial money, hundreds of billions of pounds of sort of pretend money, and then the Bank of England creates this pretend money and then lends it to the government, and they think that's some kind of way of avoiding tough decisions. Of course it's not. Of course that is going to feed through into inflation, and then naturally when you get inflation, then the trade unions are going to push for pay increases. But I think that, first of all, the trade unions probably should be looking for improvements in efficiency, improvements in productivity as a way of it being sustainable to get pay rises. And secondly, I think that Keir Starmer has managed it badly. If you think back to Tony Blair, actually, he managed to hold the coalition together. There would be John Prescott, and he would talk to the trade union leaders, and he managed to shift the Labour Party ideologically quite significantly, but he didn't actually alienate the trade unions. And so, I just think that Keir Starmer hasn't handled it, even if you agree with the direction he's wanting to take, he hasn't handled it terribly adeptly.
You were nodding there, Matt Zarb-Cousin, which I was slightly surprised.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine a situation where Tony Blair tells John Prescott he can't join a picket line. I mean, this is the situation that the Labour Party is in at the moment.
I don't think he ever did, though, did he?
Well, I can't recall any particular examples at the moment, but I'm sure that there was no ban on front benchers joining picket lines under Tony Blair. That's the difference. What Harry said is correct. Tony Blair was I disagree with him politically, but he was a very skilled politician, and that's the problem with Keir Starmer, is he's a novice. He's only elected to Parliament in 2015. He hasn't got the experience or the wherewithal to accommodate the unions and business in the coalition that he's trying to build. So his entire strategy is to try to be antagonistic towards the unions. I don't think he's going to back the strikes. He obviously didn't back the recent rail strike. But I don't think it's the union's loss, to be honest. I just think he's a very, very weak politician, and the direction of travel at the moment that he's taking strategically is not working. He's on a net approval rating of -26, and a recent poll has put the Labour Party 1 point behind the Tories. So this is not...
It's 1 point ahead. I think it's the narrowest lead.
The Labour Party 1 point behind the Tories, yeah, so...
no, I think they were 1 point ahead, but that's
the Labour Party. Sorry,
the narrowest lead of all of the recent polls.
Sure, yeah. Sorry, I stand corrected.
But did he have any alternative but to sack Sam Tarry? It wasn't really for appearing on a picket line. It was because he did unauthorised. I mean, if you imagine you were in your old job and you saw a front bencher going on television and you hadn't given him permission to do so, and then he was effectively making policy on the hoof, you would have been ringing up Jeremy Corbyn saying, well, we can't have this.
Well, it happened all the time. Keir Starmer did it himself at conference. He stood up and said, Remain has to be an option. That was not Labour policy in a second referendum. So, yeah, we had a lot of freelancers, unfortunately.
Did you advocate Jeremy should sack Keir Starmer?
I don't think he should have appointed him Brexit secretary. I think that was a mistake in hindsight. But look, this is the thing. This is the difficulty with particularly the Labour Party. Is it is a broad coalition. It's a broad church, and you have to take all of those aspects of the Labour Party with you in terms of the membership and the support. And if you can't do that, you're not going to win a general election. And the way that Keir Starmer can do that is by having a very positive, propositional vision for the country that he can unite people behind. But at the moment, all he's got is premium bonds that he's announced. I mean, no one can really say what policies he's got. A 5% cut on energy bills. I mean, it's weak sauce.
Ben Habib.
Well, I'm going to be much more strident. I think my fellow panellists have been quite measured in the way that they've described Keir Starmer's response. I think Keir Starmer's been utterly hopeless. The clue is in the name. It's the Labour Party. They should be standing up for Labour rights. And whilst no one wants to see people striking, trains not working, people unable to get to work, teachers not teaching and so on, the fact of the matter is, as Mary put it, you've had 25% before this recent spike in inflation. You've had 25% inflation over 12 years of Tory government, and you'd have 5% increase in public sector wages on average. That is a 20%. You said 25%.
Yeah,
I make it about 20%. With the current spike in inflation, it's probably much worse than that. What are people going to do? And these strikes are entirely legitimate. They've been called in accordance with the law. And Keir Starmer should actually be using this to challenge the Conservative government, to take a change of policy, to make a change in direction. What we've had is 12 years effectively of no growth. GDP this last year, is only 10% ahead of where it was in 2010 when the Conservatives took over. That is a shocking number. So we've got no growth in the economy. We've had 25% plus inflation. We've had public sector wage growth at an abysmal level compared to inflation. The only option these people have to look after themselves is to strike. And Keir Starmer should be taking the fight to the Conservative Party. He should be endorsing the strikes as optically as he might not wish the illiberal elite of Islington, to go against him. He's got to support the Labour force of this country. That's what he's elected to do.
And Mary, why couldn't you have been as strident as that?
Because I think I'm trying to, the question is put in a particular way, but I'm trying to locate the issue where it lies. And the issue lies with 12 years of a coalition and a Conservative government, which has devalued public services.
Let's move on to something a little, it's allied to this. I remember Dave Ward, the head of the CWU, came into the studio to do a phone-in 6 weeks ago, something like that, maybe a little bit more. And he was effectively advocating a general strike. And I was kind of laughing at the whole concept. But what you've just described with the different areas where people are having strike ballots, it's not quite a general strike, but it's getting to the point where,
it is going to happen.
The three of us, possibly Harry as well, will remember the lead up to the Winter of Discontent in 1979 when everybody seemed to be on strike. And it could be getting to that level of proportion, couldn't it?
Well, it could do. It's not the same. The ballot thresholds are not the same. So in the public sector, the ballot thresholds are very high. And if Liz Truss or Rishi Sunak one of them will get elected, they're going to get even higher. We're getting to anti-democratic rates of threshold. So at the moment, to go on strike, a full strike, we've got to get 50% of the members to vote and 40% to vote yes. Liz Truss has said that if she becomes elected, she'll put legislation through which will be 50% of the members voting, and of those, more than 50% voting yes. Those are punishingly high thresholds, and that's different from 1979.
Reasonable to a lot of our listeners, I'm sure.
Well, you wouldn't get any MP voted in on that margin. You wouldn't get any councillor voted in on that margin.
That's a bit of whataboutery.
You wouldn't get any Conservative leader in an election voted in on that margin.
In recent years, before that legislation
they are
some train strikes were operated on the fact that only about 15 or 20% of the union membership had even voted in.
Well, now it's 50%. And the other thing that there has been an inquiry into online voting, which has gone on now for 4 years. So the other problem we have is that if a union does a ballot, it has to be a postal ballot. It can't do, unlike the Tory party election, you can't do online voting. That suppresses turnout.
They are online voting, aren't they?
But there is gerrymandering going on. So it isn't the same as 1979. Okay. It's much harder to get a ballot threshold to get your members out.
Harry?
Well, I do remember 1979, and I remember the arguments about incomes policy and pay policy, and I mean, and there's some of these things which you think have been resolved. That we had this argument about Keynesianism and monetarism, and this idea that somehow the government could spend all this money and increase the money supply, and then try and deal with it by price controls and pay controls. And it just ignored the economic reality. Of course, if you've got inflation and if you've got increased money supply causing yet more inflation, of course there's going to be strikes and pressure for pay increases, and so the reality that we're facing now is follows almost inevitably from the huge splurge in spending, whether you think it was justified or not during the pandemic, of hundreds of billions of pounds of the government just creating this money, the Bank of England just creating this sort of pretend money and then lending it to itself, saying here's a few hundred billion, rather than it being borrowing where they go out into the gilt markets and borrow it from us, or increase tax or cut spending. They're just creating this artificial money. It's inevitable that that's going to cause inflation, and it's inevitable that when you get this inflation, there's going to be pressure and strikes for the pay increases.
But that may be the case, Harry, and I completely agree with the thesis you've just laid out. But if you compare the United Kingdom to the United States, they've had all the same money printing that we've had. They've played with funny money, but they've had a 50% growth in GDP since 2010. We've had a 10%, and in dollar terms, we haven't grown at all. And so all our growth has come at the expense of sterling to the extent we've had any. And I agree, we shouldn't have printed money perhaps in the way that we did, but we haven't had a vision. Where the Conservative Party has fundamentally failed is a vision for growth. It hasn't got an ideology driven, as they keep going on, Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak. Traditional Conservative values require growth in the economy for them to work, and the Conservative Party is without growth.
And you would probably agree, Ben, that one of the things the United States have been vindicated on is energy policy in terms of shale. I mean, just that one item has been. It's a huge item. It's a huge item, but also low tax, low regulation, free enterprise. Absolutely, I agree that we failed to have what would normally be obvious conservative policies for high growth.
We could go on for the whole hour talking about this, but we're going to move on to some other subjects, but not before we hear from Nikki Larkin, who tweets, "What is the high point of working late? Getting to listen to a few hours of Iain Dale on LBC. Thanks for keeping me entertained while working through some complicated work. You're a woman of taste and perspicacity, Nikki. We love you very much." It's 18 minutes past 8.
This is LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
It's 8:20. Robin Nebworth says, isn't it bizarre that you have people discussing UK politics and nobody is prepared to mention Brexit? Not one mention. The elephant in the room just keeps getting bigger. How long can you all ignore it? Well, it wasn't really relevant to the last question, I wouldn't have thought. But if you want to talk about Brexit, you know the number, 0345 6060 973. No subject off limits on this programme. We have with us on the panel Mary Bousted, Joint General Secretary of the National Education Union, which was an amalgamation of the NUT and ATL. Ben Habib is businessman, columnist and former Brexit Party MEP. Do you miss being an MEP, Ben?
No, there were members of the Brexit Party who were tearful on our last day because
Name them.
No, because we were breaking up as a family. We were very closely knit, but I'm delighted to be out.
Okay.
Parliament.
Matt Zarb-Cousin is campaigner, director of Clean Up Gambling and a former spokesperson for Jeremy Corbyn. I've got to ask you, do you miss being a spokesperson for Jeremy Corbyn?
No, a year was enough for me.
And Harry Phibbs is local government editor and columnist at ConservativeHome. We first got to know each other, although not very well, back in the 1980s when we were in the Federation of Conservative Students.
Oh, happy days.
Happy days, yes. Factional sort of politics, that really was, wasn't it?
Be on the same faction?
Possibly not.
I was going to say yes, but recollections may differ.
I wasn't really into the factionalism, but I was very friendly with everybody. I thought
and you still are?
I still am. I try to be anyway. Right, let's go to a text from Andrea in Hampstead. Jeremy Corbyn has urged Western countries to stop arming Ukraine and claimed he was criticised over anti-Semitism because of his stance on Palestine. Could we need any more confirmation that he's given up on being readmitted to the Labour Party? Matt, I have to come to you first on this.
Of course, yeah. This is actually a moment of real nostalgia for me. I think it's very, very unlikely that under Starmer's leadership he'll be readmitted. I think he's probably going to stand in the next election as an independent. And
how old will he be at the next election? I mean, quite well into his 70s.
Off the top of my head, I don't know. I should know, but. Yeah, I think it's very likely. It'd be interesting to see how that plays out. And obviously the result we want is a hung parliament with Jeremy holding the balance of power as an independent.
Well, wouldn't that be glorious? Wouldn't that be glorious? Keep me in a job for another few years. But being serious, I mean, going back to this interview that he gave to an Iranian-funded TV channel in Beirut, I mean, an extraordinary decision, I would have thought, on the face of it anyway. He's trending number 2 in Ukraine at the moment. This has become a worldwide story. What he's actually said, particularly about Ukraine and the fact that the West should not be arming Ukraine. He's not really in sync with the general public, is he?
Well, I think one of the points that he made was that we're not going to get peace just by throwing more and more weapons into Ukraine. That's not how you bring about peace. And as much as, obviously the invasion of Ukraine was wrong on every level, there does need to be some kind of move towards brokering peace, and I think that it's important that point is made. It's not a war that Ukraine can win, and in which case, the more weapons you throw in, the more you perpetuate that war. And
so you basically agree with what he said?
I think we should have armed Ukraine. I think that's right. That was the right thing to do, but I don't think that's the way you bring about peace.
Would you, if you were advising Jeremy Corbyn, I mean, maybe you still are, I don't know, would you be advising him to do interviews with Russian and Iranian-backed networks?
If I was still advising Jeremy Corbyn, Jeremy obviously just does what he wants, so that's nothing to do with a decision of mine anyway. So,
I sort of detect that you think this was possibly not the wisest thing he could have done.
I think the point should have been made. I think the point that he's made should have been made. I think that it is not the way. I think it's almost a delusion to think that if Ukraine can win this war, I think we have to look at how we bring about peace, and it's not through.
But you yourself just said that you agreed with arming Ukraine.
Yeah, I mean, we have a difference of opinion on that. I think it was the right thing to do to support Ukraine, but I think now we have to think about what the steps are to peace, to ending the war.
Well, the way to end the war is basically to let Russia win it, and that is what he was essentially advocating.
I think if there's a, I mean, that's the thing. That's the conversation. That's, I don't think that's really been discussed. How we can end the war, how peace can be brokered, how there can be a settlement. That's not been discussed. It seems to be an understanding among the public and among commentators as well that Ukraine are somehow going to win this war. That's how it's going to end, and unfortunately that's not the case.
Harry?
I think that Ukraine will win the war. I think the determination of the Ukrainian people, their courage and their ability is absolute. I think it was crucial that we gave them the support so early. I mean, weeks before the war started, in terms of the military supplies and also the training, of course. And that's something the Ukrainians absolutely have spotted, that Britain was ahead of the rest of the world in doing that. And now other countries, of course, are piling in and giving very significant support to Ukraine. And I would argue that if we want peace, if we want to minimise the economic cost, which obviously is huge, and also the loss of life, the way to do that is to give Ukraine absolutely full support, because the more support we give Ukraine, the sooner Ukraine will win, and that will mean the sooner the war will end. I don't believe that there's any other outcome. I don't believe that the Ukrainians will accept any other outcome than a complete defeat for Russia, a complete withdrawal for Russia, and a complete victory for Ukraine.
Do you genuinely believe that Ukraine can emerge from this victorious?
Yes, and I think increasingly, actually, I mean, we've all got different sources of information that we follow on Twitter, and you get different conflicting reports and all the rest of it. But I mean, I just think back to February, where all these supposed experts were saying that within days that Ukraine would be completely overrun, and obviously that was proved dramatically wrong. And I think each day that goes by, the Russians are getting sort of ground down. The Ukrainians are getting stronger. They're getting more supplies. They're getting better trained at using their supplies. And I'm not in any way defeatist about it. I absolutely acknowledge that it's an appalling burden for the Ukrainians and for the rest of us. And the sooner the war ends, the better. But I just feel that that's all the more reason for us to have full support and give as much support as fast as possible to the Ukrainians to ensure they win.
So just to clarify, I hope Ukraine win, obviously. I just think that if we're going to prevent further loss of life, we have to plot a route to peace. And unfortunately, I disagree. I don't think that that's possible that they're going to win the war and defeat Russia. I just don't think it's possible.
The problem is that there is this suspicion that a lot of people on Jeremy Corbyn's wing of politics actually don't want Ukraine to win this war. If you think back to when Crimea was invaded by Russia in 2014, Stop the War Coalition actually put out a poster supporting Russia, saying sort of, let's hope Russia succeeds here. And you think, well, I don't understand how normal people can think like that, hoping that a potential enemy of this country can prevail. But there we are. And I think Seamus Milne, your former colleague with Jeremy Corbyn, he liked a tweet of an article which effectively supported Russia, saying the world needs Russia to win the war. Kathleen says, Jeremy Corbyn is a lot healthier physically and mentally than Boris Johnson. Corbyn is a decent man, and I hope history lives to regret ridiculing him. Maybe he's too decent for national politics. He's certainly a good MP and supports decent causes, unlike Johnson and his cronies. Unlike them, he takes his job as an MP seriously. Mary?
I think that the basic premise that there will have to be a negotiated settlement is true. The issue is, when do you make that statement? And I think that you have to be very careful about how you talk about, in policy terms, the decisions we make about the war in Ukraine. I mean, there is no doubt that it was an absolutely unprovoked act of appalling aggression, and it is the right thing. It's one of the things that Boris Johnson actually has done right, which is providing Ukraine. Britain has led the provision of weapons to Ukraine in order to defend itself, much more than Germany, much more than France, who talked the talk but didn't walk the walk. And Britain and the USA have done that. And that was the right thing to do. Where Corbyn is right is, in the end, neither side will prevail. and in the end there will have to be a negotiated settlement. The question is, when do you start those negotiations? And that can only actually be in the gift of the two main combatants and international diplomacy.
Okay, Ben.
Well, I mean, if you look at the war through the broader European prism, we've actually won the war. We've won the war for Europe, because what we all feared that Harry mentioned was a blitzkrieg through Ukraine, and before you know it, you've got Russian missiles facing Poland, Baltic countries, and so on. And so it's absolutely right that we intervened, and we, you know, without wishing to be too demonstrably selfish about this, protect our European interests, you know, and our and British interests. I think Boris Johnson has been his strongest moment as Premier, and it was absolutely right to arm the Ukrainians. And I don't think it's for Jeremy Corbyn to decide when peace talks take place. This is for the Ukrainian people to determine. And we need to give them as much support as we possibly can. We are, of course, now locked in, as we often are, in a proxy war in a country that's not ours, where we are arming people who we know will die as a result of the armaments that we're providing them. But they wish to fight this war, and actually it is our interest that we fight it alongside them to the extent that we're able, without, I think, which I think would be disastrous to get, you know, involved directly ourselves. But I don't necessarily think the outcome of this war in Ukraine ultimately is clear. No. You know, the sanctions aren't working. No. I want to put that out there. People keep talking about this wonderful sanction package we've had. Sanctions are not working against Russia. No. Germany has bought 50 billion euros worth of oil and gas since the war kicked off, and it's funded about €1 billion worth of armaments for Russia. The Russian ruble is at its strongest in 5 years, which is a depiction of how strong Russian finances are. And Russia is actually now turning sanctions back onto Europe. That's why it's, because of its enrichment, it's able to cut gas supplies to Germany and take the threat back to us. And again, at a local level, if you look at what's happening in Ukraine, there's a large swath of southeastern Ukraine now that is occupied by Russia. And if they make their move on Odessa and that succeeds, then you've landlocked Ukraine. And so I think we're in a very precarious position in this war. And Jeremy Corbyn should hold his peace, you know, and while we try and sort this out for the, you know, for the collective best interest of Ukrainians and Europe.
Thank you for that question, Andrea. We'll come to more of your calls in just a moment on LBC. 0345 6060 973 is the number to call if you want to get through to our panel on Cross Question. It's 8:33. News headlines with Lottie Morley.
The European Court of Human Rights has rejected an appeal by Archie Battersby's family to intervene in his case. The 12-year-old's been in a coma since April. His family are now trying to move him to a hospice. Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak are setting out their agendas in front of an audience in Cardiff. The pair have given their opening speeches and will now take it in turns to answer questions from Tory party members. And after the driest July on record in England, South East Water are banning people from using hose pipes. People living in parts of Kent and Sussex won't be allowed to use them from next Friday. LBC weather, showers for Northern Ireland and Scotland tonight, staying mostly dry for England and Wales, and a low of 8 degrees.
LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC.
8:36 on LBC. You've had a great question coming in from Gordon, who says, can you ask your panel, what is the purpose of Britain? What do we exist for? Well, if we have time, we might get to that one, but let me reintroduce our panel to you. Harry Phibbs is local government editor and columnist at ConservativeHome. Matt Zarb-Cousin, who's sitting to my immediate right, he is a campaigner and director of Clean Up Gambling and former spokesperson for Jeremy Corbyn. Ben Habib, over there, if you're watching, is a businessman and columnist and former Brexit Party MEP. And sitting next to me on my left is Mary Bousted, Joint General Secretary of the National Education Union. So they are here to answer your questions. The number to call 0345 6060 973. Alex is in Watford. Hello, Alex.
Good evening, Ian. Good evening, panel.
Hi.
Hi. History always repeats itself. What action has got to be taken to stop the Great Depression happening this century?
That's the sort of question I feel I want to put to 4 Nobel Prize-winning economists. But in the absence of those, Harry Phibbs.
Well, if we think to the 1930s depression, which is what we tend to think about with depression, I mean, that was one of the problems was of tariffs, wasn't there? A restriction on trade. And one of the ways of in international terms, of generating economic growth is through free trade. And naturally, as a Brexiteer, I hope that we will take much bolder opportunities, which we've made very tentative, modest steps forward towards free trade. But it's not just about what we're doing. I think, Africa, for example, has a move towards free trade. So I wouldn't be too gloomy. I think that we've got prospects for those of us who believe in free trade, free markets, property rights, low tax, looking around the world, looking what's happened in India, looking what's happening in various countries. The fundamentals, I think, are quite promising that we will see wider prosperity and good economic growth.
Ben.
Well, yeah, I mean, things have been, I think, out of kilter economically ever since the 2008 crash. And we dabbled in the magic money tree, which we've talked about. And I think then we printed something like £250 billion in order to sustain ourselves. And we've now, through lockdowns, printed another 500 billion. So something like close to nearly £1 trillion of debt is owned by the Bank of England. And as much as that has thrown things into complete imbalance in the economy, actually both those moves staved off depressions, because the financial crisis itself could have caused a depression, and certainly lockdowns would have caused civil unrest if the government hadn't printed money. So I think a depression is probably unlikely, given the preparedness of governments to do whatever is necessary to avoid it. But we've got to be very, very careful with this magic money tree, because the knock-on effects of it are vast. And just coming back to where we started this discussion, we've talked about inflation in terms of consumer prices and the impact that's had on the working classes, the public sector, and even indeed the middle classes. But before that happened, back in 2008, what took place was putting assets, property, housing out of the reach of the working and middle classes. And I would say that, which is the bedrock of conservative capitalism, the aspiration to own your own place, putting that out of reach of people was a dramatically destructive move for our capitalist system. And we need a new broom, as it were, and Rishi doesn't offer it. He offers nothing other than continuity. But Liz Truss may do it. We need a new view of how we re-engineer our economy to make sure that every time we have a crisis, it's not the working class and middle classes and the public sector that pay the price, that we are able to deal with those crises and come out with pro-growth policies after they take place. Osborne was unable to do it, and Rishi Sunak is unable to do it.
Mary.
Well, I think we're in danger of, for many people in our country, very severe depression over the course of the next year. I mean, I was just looking in the Financial Times today, the National Institute for Economic and Social Research, a highly reputable think tank, says the number of families they project in the report published today, the number of families with no savings to fall back on at all will double to 5.3 million by 2024. More than 1 million households are at risk, and these are their words, are at risk of severe destitution, with food and energy bills exceeding their disposable income, actually making they either choose between food or heating. For many families, it will be inadequate food and no heating. And they say tax cuts will not help these families because they are destitute. They pay the lowest rate of tax. So tax cuts, what we need is targeted welfare support for the most poorest in our society, so they can eat and they can heat. We need investment in public services so that we can drive productivity.
If you've got the economic growth, which Ben points out,
you're not going to get the economic growth until by 2025. This government is boasting that it will get spending levels in real terms on schools back to where they were in 2010. Actually, with inflation, they won't even get there. Now, you cannot have that squeeze on public infrastructure and expect productivity and growth. There's many economists who are making that point. If you're just going to wait for growth and you're going to starve public services, you starve the basis of a civilised society, and you get people who are desperate. And we're talking about a depression, and we're talking about civil unrest. I tell you now, the movement about the autumn about not paying your heating bills, that will become a movement, and people will not pay their heating bills.
We talked about that on the programme last night. Matt?
Well, I think the way out of a Great Depression is through Keynesian investment in the economy. And I think what the government has to recognise is that the economic model that we used to have in this country pre-2008 is broken and it's not coming back. And unfortunately, there's no political party at the moment that's putting forward enough of a vision for this country for restructuring and remodelling our economy. And Jeremy Corbyn tried to do it in 2019, and obviously everyone was laughing at him. But I think really Corbynism and the platform, that particular platform, would have at least offered a path through some of the crises we're seeing at the moment. I'm talking about nationalising our energy infrastructure, for example.
Yeah.
People are seeing at the moment the energy companies posting record profits. Some of them have doubled or trebled their profits. And people are now going to be expected in autumn to pay £3,500 a year for their energy and heating and electricity bills. So, look, I think you're absolutely right, Mary. I think that the Don't Pay campaign, I think that's going to grow. I think people are going to cancel their direct debits until the government intervenes in a way that can control prices in some of these sectors. Because at the moment, everyone who's paying that extra money each month for their gas and electric, that's just going into the pockets of shareholders. That's going somewhere. It's not because for any other reason. So I think until we get a government that's prepared to do things like reduce the energy price cap, then unfortunately the cost of living crisis is just going to spiral out of control.
Can I just say one more thing?
Go on.
I mean, one of the things I find most remarkable about this Tory leadership race is both Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss. When they're doing this blue-on-blue fighting and saying we've got the weakest growth, and Liz Truss says, my local hospital, the Queen Elizabeth Hospital in Norwich, is being held up by stilts, etc. It's as though they haven't... King's Lynn. Sorry, yeah, King's Lynn. It's as though they haven't been in power. Under whose watch has the public infrastructure become so enfeebled and so inadequate? And if you do that to public services, then you do create the conditions where the poorest go to the wall. We have a hugely unequal society. And my members, teachers and support staff, we did a survey before our conference at Easter on child poverty. We had a huge response. And if you read the replies of those teachers, you would weep. Children coming to school hungry. Children coming to school in winter with sandals on because their parents can't afford winter shoes. Children coming to school where they've not been able to sleep because they've got 4 children to a bed in inadequate housing in London because children, because of the 2-child policy, the 3rd child getting no support. I mean, these are desperate times. We're talking about a depression as though it's some hypothetical future. For many, many people in our population now, the depression is now.
Well, I mean, can I just develop that? I mean, I just want to go
quickly,
back.
Ben, I need to go.
Well, I just want to say, just go back to what Harry said. Here, energy independence is vital. We should not have shut down our North Sea gas extraction. We should be fracking. We need to get on and get back on our feet on energy. And this this sort of predilection with the drive to net zero at all cost, that needs to be challenged. I know that won't get us through this winter, but we need to get back on our feet on energy independence.
Okay, right, let's move on. 0345 6060 973. We'll come back to more of your calls in just a moment. You're listening to LBC's Cross Question. I'm Iain Dale. It's 8:46.
LBC. Nick Ferrari at breakfast.
The U-turn performed by Liz Truss. Brandon Lewis is Conservative MP. He's also served as chairman of the party. How embarrassing is this for the candidate that you've endorsed?
No, it's not. I think Liz outlined yesterday a whole package of things around dealing with Whitehall waste. This is not a policy that's going to be taken forward.
So why did she ever put it forward?
Well, as I say, it was part of a package of things to deal with Whitehall waste.
But this isn't the first time she's supported this. 4 years she's nursed this ambition to cut pay.
Liz yesterday set out a set of policies to deal with Whitehall waste. One part of that, she's been very clear, we're not going to take forward.
Nick Ferrari at breakfast. Back tomorrow morning from 7. Listen on your radio and on Global Player. LBC. Cross Question with Iain Dale on LBC. Call 0345 6060 973.
It's 10 to 9 on LBC. Mary Bousted, Ben Habib, Matt Zarb-Cousin and Harry Phibbs with us to answer your questions. One of our panellists, I won't say which one, said, God, they're really difficult questions tonight, aren't they? And I said, yeah, that's because we have really intelligent listeners. And Annette in Camden is going to prove me right again. She's a text questioner. She says, do you think it's right that hospitals feel that they can play God with people's lives, such as Archie Battersby? Ben Habib.
Well, Archie's story is a very sad one, as indeed is all stories to do with losing a child or any member of one's family. But I think hospitals do have to make that decision. They have to exercise their judgment in the interests of the, again, slightly politically charged term, but, in the interests of the greater good. They've got to decide who they can treat, who's savable, what are the best ways of doing it. And as tragic as Archie's story is, I'm probably on balance without really knowing all the detail on the hospital side.
Let's bring the media role into this, because I'm profoundly uncomfortable with the way that the media covers stories like this. And I understand that the parents rely on the media to put forward their story. But there's something that I just feel is intrinsically wrong, and that it's sort of gawping into people's private tragedies, Mary?
Yeah, and of course the doctors who are making the decisions don't go on television to say these are the clinical reasons why I make these decisions. I mean, I'll say two things about this, three things. First of all, it's incredibly tragic. The thought of losing a child is unimaginable, and you can see why the parents have fought as they have. The second thing I would say is that we have a medical profession who are very highly trained, who have to make these difficult ethical medical decisions, and they don't do so on their own. They do so according to protocols, and they will have given their immense professionalism and thought, and their judgment, I think, needs to be respected. And the third thing is, the worst place that this can be played out is in the courts. We have to find a better way of enabling the parents and the medical profession to come to ways of understanding each other's point of view and agreements.
Matt?
Yeah, I think so. I think there needs to be a better way of mediating these particular cases, and obviously it's extremely tragic, and I feel incredibly sorry for the family, and I understand exactly why they fought the way they did, and I think they're right to. I also think that, I think it's been extremely costly. It's gone to the European Court of Human Rights. It's been very protracted, and as you say, the media's in that time intruded considerably into the private lives of this particular family, and I think made it worse. So I think there absolutely has to be a better way of mediating this. But in this instance, unfortunately, the medical profession has come down on one particular side, and I think there needs to be a better understanding of why that is as well, which I don't think has been covered adequately.
Harry?
Well, we're less deferential towards experts or towards the establishment now than we used to be, and that's a good thing. And if you're a parent who's fighting for the life of your child, I mean, you're going to be in the least deferential position of anybody imaginable. So I've got a lot of sympathy with that, and we're all speaking from ignorance, really, on the exact details about where you draw the line and whether there's any possibility of recovery. I mean, it's so awful and harrowing. I've tried to avoid looking into too much detail, but I think that there has to be a cut-off point, doesn't there? And probably the medical judgment is right, but I completely sympathise with the parents pushing and challenging as strongly as they have.
Because they clearly believe that there is a chance that he could recover, and however unlikely that may seem, just on what we know and what again, you have to trust what the medical experts say. But sometimes there is somebody who recovers miraculously for no scientific reason, and I suppose that's what the family cling on to.
I think it's very difficult.
If you've got a child, I mean, I don't have children, but if I did, I can understand why the parents would go to the length.
It's their obligation in a sense, isn't it?
Yeah. Right. Let's thank you for that, Annette. Let's go to Ulf in Hamburg. Ulf, hi. What would you like to ask?
Hello, good evening. I would like to ask, let's assume I said the following thing. The political system of the UK is so awful that the Tories could abolish, maybe step by step, freedom of speech, and nobody could do anything about it. If I said such a thing, would I have vilified your country, and what would you do about it? And what you do about Iain, because he let me speak my mind on LBC.
Well, we'd both be referred to the Prevent programme under Rishi Sunak's proposals, wouldn't we? Harry, we talked about this in the first hour of the programme, that Rishi Sunak says that if people vilify the United Kingdom, they could be referred to the Prevent programme, which I said I thought was way over the top, a ridiculous suggestion.
I think, yes, and my guess is that Rishi Sunak probably doesn't believe it himself. I think that. In some ways, it's good, this the Tory leadership debate, that people are putting ideas forward, they're being challenged, they're being pushed. That before someone becomes Prime Minister, they're going through this process. But it doesn't.
They're not their own ideas, are they? I mean, Liz Truss, that policy that she U-turned on yesterday, she nicked that from the Taxpayers Alliance. I don't know which particular think tank Rishi Sunak got this one from, but it didn't come out of his own brain, I suspect.
And I think there's a high pressure 24/7 media cycle to show momentum, to show they've got radicalism, they've got ideas. Sorry to mention the word momentum, but no, I think it's unfortunate what Rishi Sunak has said, but of course, free speech more generally is a very important issue and is been under significant threat in terms of, as we all seen, the police going and arresting people for comments might well be provocative, might well be offensive that they made on social media. The police should not be involved in that. And whenever it happens, as an instance saying, well, this is quite wrong, what are the police doing? And then it happens again and again and again. So I absolutely think in universities, in schools, in lots of places, there is a concern about free speech. But no, I don't think I don't think Rishi's plan is a good one.
Mary, if this came in, I mean, would you think that teachers are going to be expected to refer pupils to Prevent if they stand up in a, say, sixth form general studies class and start mouthing off about what an awful country they live in?
Well, I mean, who knows? I mean, I can't take this seriously, actually. I just think this is some sort of bizarre sort of thrust to try and gain some momentum and appeal to the 160,000 Conservative.
I'm told it's 176,000.
Is it?
Everybody keeps saying 160,000.
Well, they won't reveal their lists, so you don't know. Unlike unions, where we have someone independently checking our membership, they don't reveal this. So, I mean, it's nonsense, isn't it? But it does. The fact that it can be said, I think, speaks to a worrying suppression, a creeping suppression by this government on free speech, on the right to protest, on the misuse of state power in order to suppress debate. I mean, this is nonsense, but that doesn't mean to say we shouldn't be worried about the creeping authoritarianism of the state.
Ben?
Yeah, I mean, I broadly agree. You know, we've got the online harms bill going through Parliament, and that effectively makes it illegal to have bad thoughts and to say things that people may not like. And I think it was profoundly stupid of Rishi Sunak, a Wickhamist and an Oxonian, to suggest that...
What's that got to do with the process?
Well, I mean, he's an incredibly well-educated individual. He must know, certainly as a Wickhamist, who I had a son at Winchester, and, you know, they are taught that they have to challenge everything. Everything needs to be subject to debate. And if you can't challenge your own country, its institutions and those who govern us, then, you know, where are we as a country? It's you cannot effect change through continuity and suppression of ideas.
Matt?
Well, I think it's quite a sad indictment on the Conservative Party that the country faces this kind of existential crisis on multiple levels, and we've had a leadership debate dominated by the fight against wokeism and trying to suppress freedom of speech, which are two kind of contradictory, I think, ideas. We've had very little on, you know, economic policy. We've had very little on how we're going to tackle the energy crisis. We've had very little on anything really meaningful to people's day-to-day lives. And I think that is, unfortunately, a reflection of, yes, they're wanting to appeal to the Tory membership, but I think it's pretty sad that that's what they need to do, and that this particular selectorate is going to be picking out its Prime Minister.
I don't even think the Tory party membership would be particularly...
No, I don't think it'll resonate at all.
There we go. Right, Ulf, thank you very much indeed. Now, our fun text for the end of the programme from Jane in Hillingdon says, I'm playing a tiny violin for Batgirl, scrapped before anyone got a chance to see it. Panel, which film do you wish had been scrapped before you had seen it? Who'd like to go first? Ben, I'm sure you've got a...
Oh my God, Love Story. Love Story.
It's marvellous.
It's awful. Have you watched it again? Maybe you watched it in the 1970s.
I watched it when I was a teenager.
I made the mistake of watching it the other day, and the acting is appalling, and I wasn't moved by it at all, and I would highly recommend deleting Love Story.
OK, Mary.
Oh, I don't really know. I mean, whenever I'm asked a question like that, I go a complete blank. actually. But probably anything with a lot of violence in it, because I find that terrible.
Okay. Matt?
I can't remember what it's called. It was so bad, but there was a Western recently on Netflix, like quite a modern Western, and that was terrible. There's a lot of dross on Netflix because I think they just hand over. They're desperate for content. They hand over big checks to these production companies, and that's it. That's the end of it. So yeah, lots of things on Netflix that I've wasted time watching.
Harry?
Well, when I was a 12-year-old, a huge treat was for me to go and see this exciting new film called Star Wars, and I thought it was completely boring, completely worthless. And then for decades later, all the film buffs have told me this was this incredible breakthrough in films. And I'd never... And I agree with my 12-year-old self that it's just waste of time.
I totally agree with you.
I must agree there.
Life of Brian, another one.
Oh, I love Life of Brian.
Anyway, thank you so much to all of you for joining us this evening. Mary Bousted, Ben Habib, Matt Zarb-Cousin and Harry Phibbs. This is the last cross question until, I think, September the 5th, can you believe? So thank you for taking part, and thanks to all of our guests over the latest run. Now, in a moment, we're going to talk about the fact that drug-related deaths have reached a record level across England and Wales, with new figures out today. In Scotland, they've been at a very high level for a very long time. We'll talk about that as well. What can be done to prevent so many people dying from taking drugs? It's 9:02 on LBC.
On your radio, on Global Player, and
Play LBC.
Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom at 9 o'clock. Archie Battersby's mother says the legal battle to stop her son's life support from being withdrawn is over. Holly Dance says the family are now looking to move the 12-year-old to a hospice. It's after the European Court of Human Rights decided not to intervene in the decision to stop his treatment.